Well, let me start with a question. Do you remember life before Google? Or better, do you remember the time when information was in fact a monopoly of libraries and of encyclopedias? I really do, because I became a librarian out of curiosity when I was already a grown-up, because I never got a book out of a library. Because, you know, libraries, you had to know the rules, you had to pass the desk, you had to know the opening hours, and it was not always easy to be a reader. And then suddenly, for me, out of the blue, but I still remember my first search in Google. I still remember what kind of weather it was, what time it was, etc. And then suddenly Google came, and everything became more colorful. You remember that first screen? It became more colorful, and libraries really realized that for the first time, we had a real competitor that was more friendly, that was much quicker, that was much easier, 2 words and you already had your result. So a lot of libraries were thinking, oh, something bad can happen to us. So I think you know that there is a rule: when you can't beat them, join them. So imagine what happens when you're thinking of that and one day Google knocks at your door. What happened at the book tower? One day we were visited by 7 men. We were not allowed to talk about it. We were not allowed to tell anyone. There were only 2 of us who knew that they were coming. But imagine, they arrived at the library and they were all wearing a backpack with embroidered colored letters, Google. So everyone knew who had entered the building, you know? So that was a problem. And do you know why they chose us? I don't know why you realize what the book tower, what the content of the book tower is. But we have to go back to the 18th century French Revolution. Cloisters and monasteries were not allowed to exist anymore, so all books and paintings were brought together, and that was in fact the core of what's now in the book tower. But we also had this wonderful chief librarian. You may never have heard of him. His name was Ferdinand van der Hagen. He was married to a very rich woman, so he could buy whatever book he wanted, but he was also collecting for the university library. And God, he made a collection that is really worth keeping, and a wonderful collection, in fact. And he had this younger colleague, or more or less colleague in the French part of the country, and maybe that name rings a little bell, Paul Audelet. He too, just as van der Hagen, was thinking of the question where, and I'm sorry to say it was especially men in the 19th century, were busy with, and that's how can we classify the world? How can we classify information? And you know, things that he gathered were books like this. We have a lot on horticulture. I'm only going to show 2 things, I guess. This one and another one, which is amazing, isn't it? Imagine to meet a bat like this one. But isn't it great that this is something that is kept in a collection that is open to the public, open to everyone, and that now, through digitization, is open to the world for free, can be reused. So this is something that Google wanted with our collection. So van der Hagen and Audelet in the 19th century were especially busy with what's the use of collecting if you can't find it back. So we should classify. I think you know that today finding something like searching on the internet is much, much easier than in those days. And what Google asked us was to prepare 5,000 books a month. That's a lot, you know. To add metadata to it. And they came with a big van. They brought it to a secret place. They scanned it in a secret way. I know, but don't ask me because I'm not going to tell you. And they returned it. We can get a digitized copy, but they also put it in Google Books where it's so easy to find what you are interested in, because you can search on each word in the book. Imagine what a richness that is. And you know, today, 250,000 books out of the book tower are digitized and almost all online. And you know, this is good for, and this is not a mistake, 100,000 views a day. This is amazing. Imagine to have 100,000 visitors in front of the library every day. You don't want that, but here it's used, you know. So that's what Google asked, and to make it a bit clear for you, 250,000 books, if you take an average of 5 centimeters a book, it is indeed 12 kilometers of books that left the book tower and came back to the book tower. Impeccable, nothing happened to it. So we were happy about that. But there is one big but in the whole story, and that's the date. Google is very sensitive to everything which is copyright. They got a lot of processes because of it in the States, but they are very, very careful in Europe. So no book that is younger than 1874 could go to the digitization program, which is a pity, because this means that this one, 1924, could not join, although it's a beauty. 1924, it's not that long after the First World War. Imagine, a lot of people had lived in big houses with servants, and in fact, this magazine wants to tell them, you can still stay in your big houses, you know, because you don't need any servants anymore. There is electricity today. And look what electricity there was. Look at the man in the bathroom, and look at the little thread. I wouldn't trust it. Going from, I don't know where, to tapis chauffant, so a heated rug next to the bath, 1924. I think this is something to stay in your bath instead of getting out of it. And the woman of the house was in the cellar with a vacuum cleaner. And the most weird thing in the magazine is this one. This is a dishwasher. I don't know how dishes ever got out of it. But look, because of the date 1924, so Google says, you can have been 12 when you wrote your first book. You could have become 100 years old and then 70 years of copyright. So no, 1874. Next year, in 2015, it's 1875 and so on. But now we are stuck there, and oh, how much we wanted to have all this also digitized. We're not the only providers of Google Books, of course. They also have the big collections, especially in the States, of Stanford and Harvard and Oxford and Keio in Japan. So there are a lot of more books than the ones that are in the book tower. And yes, indeed, Google has its rare and weird sides because all the secrecy of how to digitize, but it's a commercial firm. And be sure of that, our university would never, ever have given the budget to digitize 250,000 books to put open to the world. Forget it. So this is not something they would have done, but thanks to Google, they're online. And imagine what can happen to a book. The worst thing of a book is to disappear. And not just the book itself, but especially the content. And there are many, many ways of losing a book, you know. War, for instance. It's not that far from us, you know. Leuven University was burned down twice, so they lost a lot of collection. Water. We once had a water leak on the 17th floor, water meandering through the tower, and 20,000 wet books that still look like a book that has been wet, but the content is still there. Fire, oh, keep that away from us, please. And theft. And alas, we had big thefts in the past, and I hope I can say in the past. So this can all happen to a book. So in fact, today we have the possibility to digitize. And, you know, we don't have that question anymore of how can we classify it, how can we find it back. It's much easier now. We can take care of the real book to have it in good temperature, kept safe, etc. But now we have the possibility to share it. And that's the most important thing, and the question we should ask ourselves today. What's the use of collecting if you do not share it? And I can tell you, when you share, what a pleasure that is. And talking about sharing, thanks, Pat Hoogstenbach, for sharing all these beautiful drawings with us. Thank you.